I'm invincible. I'm paying money. The girl's happy. She's got no money. I got my rocks off. Oh, how good is this?
And good morning. You're listening to Bound for Glory on SYN 90.7 FM. We have got a lot to talk about today. It's been a massive night in football last night. We're lucky enough to be joined by the one and only Rohan Connolly this morning.
Hi guys.
We've got the regulars in.
I was going to say the other regular Muppets.
There are other people.
Ben, Matt, and
good morning.
Ben. Yes, hi.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jordan. Of course, I didn't introduce myself, but I am here. Yep. Do you want to talk? You go on.
Talk. We do have some football to talk about.
We do, yeah.
A relatively boring game in Hawthorn versus West Coast. The MCG.
After the first quarter is pretty boring.
Yeah, you could have had a nap and woken up the next. It's not really a nap. That's sleeping. It was a very boring game.
Well,
basically.
I think West Coast applied the clamps. Hawthorn got a lot of outside run in the first quarter. They destroyed off half back. There was hardly any forward pressure from the West Coast. You didn't think that they had a forward press last year. That was that well known. It was bizarre how they just let Suckling and Birchall and just those flankers just run riot.
I was going to say, if you give Matt Suckling enough touches on the half-back line, you're going to lose because his kicking is just fantastic. And if he can put the ball inside 50, you're in trouble.
You get 24 touches, running at 88%. I mean, Rohan, you were there last night. Just that first quarter, what was, were the West Coast ready? They weren't mentally set?
They didn't look switched on to me. I was doing boundary for SEN, and you could tell probably in the first 10 minutes they just didn't have the right mindset. Funnily enough, I mean, this sounds a bit silly, but I think they're not used to playing night games in Melbourne in the open air. I'm trying to remember the last time they actually played a night game at the MCG. I think you'd have to go a fair way back, and a lot of West Coast people were saying to me before the game, gee, it's cold. That wasn't a good sign in my book. So, yeah, look, Hawthorn had the intensity, they made all the running, and it was a sort of catch-up mission from there, really.
They beat them in the second half, West Coast, I think by about 2 goals or something like that.
But, I mean, if you kick 7 goals to 1 in the first quarter, you can pretty much put the queue in the rack. I mean, that's it. And it shows. I mean, they really did. They kicked 7 goals in the first quarter and they kicked another 7 goals for the rest of the game, Hawthorn. And, I mean, Buddy was quiet after the first quarter, and that's it pretty much. I mean, if he kicks 4 goals in the first quarter and sets up another 2 and you're 30-odd points ahead after 1 quarter, that's the game. West Coast were playing catch-up.
I mean, yeah, even Hawthorn's first quarter, they ran in support for most of the game. There was always someone standing there to help out the player with the ball. When the West Coast, players went to press up, there was always someone waiting for the handball to, step up and that sort of was the start of how Hawthorn got on top. Franklin was sensational. The first 6 goals of the game were because of him. What was the stat you made on SEN last night?
Oh, we do a segment pre-game, what will, what won't, what might happen, and I went with Buddy will kick 7 and was roundly held down, and after about, 4 after about 15 minutes, and the other guys upstairs were just going, oh, here we go, Rowan's going to be licking himself all night. So I was riding high on that for a while, but he sort of took the foot off the pedal a bit, Buddy. He seemed to come on and off a bit more than usual too. I guess they've got to preserve him for the month ahead.
How many rotations did you say it was?
I think it was 7 or 8 after quarter time. After the game, it was okay, but during the game, a lot of people were concerned that something wasn't right and that his fitness clearly isn't where it should be at this time of the year.
Yeah, he was blowing it out a bit. I mean, I've got to say in that boundary riding role, you always... you don't like it when someone like Buddy comes off because all the little groupies come down to the fence and start trying to take pictures and stuff and get in your way. So I was sort of cursing that one a bit. And the biggest cheer of the night actually probably was when Cyril Rioli ripped off the subs jacket. I love the way they sort of theatrically rip off the green vest these days. Yeah, lovely. And it seriously, that can make some noise, the Hawthorn fans. I've got to give it to them. They're very, very vocal.
Now, the big question we've been talking about all year really is Hawthorn's consistency and that sort of thing, and it's sort of damaged them in previous years. Are they good enough to go on and win the flag from here? They're going to finish top spot.
Yeah. Oh, look, I've got to say they weren't my tip. I just had a couple of little things in the back of my mind, but they've taken care of them, and you'd be silly not to be tipping them at this stage. And I think it's probably only 2 games this year that kept people wondering about them. One was the Sydney loss down in Tassie where they got overrun. And then the big one was the Richmond game when Richmond pumped them. And I did that game, and I guess a few of us after that thought, do they have that sort of mental consistency? But you take that out of the equation, and they've been very, very solid. And, I guess even the Geelong game, they gave up a 50-point head start but managed to overhaul that, get in front. They've got all the weaponry. I think Burgoyne can make a real big difference to them. He's so flexible for them. He tended to sort of drift more across half-back last night, but in the midfield last week, I thought he effectively won them the game. So he's a huge weapon for them as well. So they tick all the boxes, don't they? It's funny, I still don't write Collingwood off as a flag possibility. I know a lot of people have. They'd surely want to get a wriggle on. I think tonight will probably be a good confidence booster for them. But, if they can sort of stitch it together tonight and have a good first final, I wouldn't put it beyond them still. Then you got the wild card out of the top 4 Geelong, and a lot depends on sort of how they go against the Swans today and obviously next week.
Who is it that if they lose tonight, Hawthorn and West Coast will play again next week in the first final?
Collingwood. If
Collingwood would have to lose,
right.
Yeah, which you could write your own ticket on, to be honest. Having seen Essendon fairly closely this year, they are absolutely shot to ribbons.
What would you say West Coast need to fix? It was obviously the pressure last night. It was apparent that they weren't going to that next player that was going to kick the ball down the ground, that they weren't applying the press as they were last year. Is that one thing they need to fix?
Yeah, and I think we interviewed Luke Shuey after the game, and he conceded that even on a ground like the MCG, it's a bit harder to get the press working as effectively as at Subiaco. And I think just a bit of finesse, to be honest. Their midfield has come back into form, but I don't know if it's quite deep enough. It relies on Natanui and Cox sort of almost being de facto runners as well as ruckman. And guys, I love Pritis. He's a ball magnet, and he's so steady. But just that elite kicking ability, it's certainly not at the level of Hawthorn's. And you saw that a few times last night. Even Daniel Kerr was as good as his skills are. They were just sort of popping the ball up in the air, whereas Hawthorn have just got so many beautiful kicks, and we've all talked about that a lot, but that is a very big weapon for them.
Well, Pritis had 27 touches at 67%, which
it's not
down.
the sort of percentage you can afford.
Scott Selwood has had a ripper season. He was great last night. 35 touches, 20 of them contested. That's a huge effort.
He's their number one midfielder for me. Another example, I guess, of what we're talking about, Andrew Embley. Good. Okay game, got plenty of the ball, but his touches don't really hurt you, whereas even a guy like Sam Mitchell, he used to get a bit of a knock on his disposal, but I find his use to the ball's pretty solid. So is Brad Sewell. There's no one in the Hawthorn side who you think is a real butcher of the football. So when the finals come around and the physical pressure is more intense, your kicking skills are at even more of a premium, and they've got the best in the comp.
If most of the Hawthorn players have really good kicking skills, then what makes them lose games of football that they should win? They dropped one against Richmond earlier in the year.
Yeah, well, I think it's, it is a long season, 22 games, the sort of level that they play at now, it's very hard to sustain that effort across a 6-month period. And I think, their consistency this year is about as good as you're going to get. We've had, Sydney won, 9 games in a row. They've lost 2 of the last 3, only narrowly. But even from within a game, I think now, without having checked the figures, I think now, particularly in the last few years, you've seen a lot more games where sides can really get everything right for, say, a quarter, 2 quarters, but you can't for a full game. One game that leaps to mind for me is the Sydney-Essendon game, where Sydney just pantsed Essendon for 3 quarters, and then Essendon turned it on for 1 quarter and nearly stole a game. You saw Hawthorn-Geelong a few weeks ago. You're going to see more of that because they play at such a high level now, both psychologically and physically, that it's very, very hard to sustain it across four quarters.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I don't think I've seen a top 4 team this year play 4 quarters of football in any game. It's been like one of those years that it's drained, and that may be because the season's longer now. It may be because there's more of a workload. One of that is even injuries. And last night you were on the boundary. Guerra, Kennedy and Gunston, I think, was subbed off.
Yeah.
What was the extent of their injuries?
Well, Gunston, they were saying, was actually, Hawthorn was saying it was an ankle afterwards, not a knee, and I think that was right. I mean, I was in the rooms and saw him. He seemed to be moving okay, so I think that was just a bit of a cautionary thing. I think he'll be okay. Kennedy, West Coast said, was ankle, which immediately would ring the alarm bells. But it's funny, actually, because Worsfold said that he actually came back on the ground. If he did, it was only in the last few seconds. But we looked up and he did actually come back. So you think he'd have to be more likely than not. Guerra, I'd say, is done and dusted. I mean, that was a really bad hamstring tear. He was on crutches. Hammies are, at best, are usually a 3-week layoff, so it doesn't give him much time. And look, to be fair, without any disrespect to him, if it was a Franklin or a Rioli, you might really push it to the nth degree and take a risk.
Cover Guerra.
I think they can cover him enough so that they wouldn't be taking a risk with him. And just the look on his face, even 10 seconds after he did it, said, that's it for me, Sad for him. I mean, he had his one and only premiership medallion pinched during the week, and now he's effectively had another one pinched.
Shocking week.
It was said after the game that if it were in the middle of the season, he'd be out for 5 weeks. So I guess it all depends on how many risks they're willing to take as far as the finals go.
Well, it's not like they're short of depth, is it? I mean, we were talking about who are the sort of players that could cover for him, and I mean, the fact they dropped Xavier Ellis last night for Rioli, I mean, he's a very solid player who has the runs on the board in a grand final, so you wouldn't be reticent to put him back in at Guerra. I don't know if he'd occupy the same position, but I think he could at a pinch. So plenty of depth. Like I said, I mean, there's really no quality Hawthorn are dodgy in anymore.
See, I mentioned earlier in the year that I look at the top 4 and I don't really see an outright winner. I think you can come up, for every reason you believe that a team will win the premiership, you can come up with 2 why they can't.
Yeah, no, it's a good call. In fact, I've sort of written that today in the Age about Sydney. I mean, if you look hard enough, you can find ifs and buts about virtually everyone. I think Hawthorn's as close to the perfect model as you want. One thing that's been interesting for me this year is the sort of... what's the word I'm looking for? Reticence to push Adelaide as a prospect. And they've hovered near the top of the ladder all year. I think partly there's a bit of a time lag factor. When a side's been down for a couple of years and come back, you seem to spend most of that whole year saying, are they the real deal? Are they the real deal? And we did that last year with West Coast. I think we've done it to an extent with Adelaide.
Was it Mick? Sorry, Rowan. Was it Mick Malthouse that said that the Swans and the Crows weren't the worthy top 2?
He did, and Mick's he said a few provocative and perhaps silly things in the media lately, and I guess that's what they're paying him to do. But I would have thought if a side's been around the top 4 the entire year, they have to be a legitimate chance. And look, it's going to be Hawthorn, Sydney, Adelaide, Collingwood clearly have the best chances, given they've got the double chance. Geelong clearly, for mine, is the best flag chance beyond the top 4 we've seen since the top 4 was revamped, that is, in 2000. The others, I don't think they're good enough to go all the way. West Coast, I guess they could deal themselves back in with a win in the first final at home. Then again, if they end up playing Freo in the first final at home, there's a fair chance they won't get it. Exactly. And that's why it is looming as one of the great final series, just because there's so many possibilities.
Yeah, I think now we're just going to go straight to probably one of our better segments on the podcast. The one that we put a lot of work into.
Yeah, sure.
Just on the train this morning.
So, yeah. Look, the big issue of the week is obviously the Brett Ratten sacking at Carlton. But here at Bound for Glory, we sort of have a bit of inside news, and that's that Brett Ratten wanted out. Not really, but yes, look, for the top 11's sake, let's believe that, all right? Now, look, top 11 titled this week, top 11 reasons Brett Ratten is no longer at Carlton. Number 11, Stephen Kernahan said that if he left, he'd get unlimited lives. Number 10, he was jealous of Jeannie Pratt's haircut. Number 9...
Oh, she's on another level. I don't think she's from this planet.
No, Number 9, he didn't want to be associated with Andrew Walker's hat. Number 8... He and the board decided that he wasn't Malthousey enough for the job. Number 7, the possibility of coaching an illustrious club such as Port Adelaide was something he couldn't refuse. Number 6, if he had to watch Levi Casbolt's kicking action any longer, he'd terminate his life contract. Number 5, he'd rather drink and smoke all day while on the dole than have a job, Gina. Number 4, slap. Number 4, he quit while under pressure so that he could be like Bryce Gibbs.
You're a Carlton supporter.
I know, you're really digging in the boots.
I think that's coming through, that there's a disaffected Carlton fan.
Number 3, couldn't stand looking at Paul Bauer's shit tattoo any longer. Number 2, he was offered a spot on GWS's playing list. And number 1, he plans on buying out Port Adelaide with the remaining money in his contract.
Very good work. Fantastic.
Once again, Marston, right on. We'll be back and we'll actually talk about Carlton. Rohan Connolly on the show. Text us in with your thoughts on 0427 767 767. I've got it right this week. We'll be back right after this.
Looking for a fun excursion?
SYN offers exciting radio tours for schools, community groups and more.
Learn about community radio and get hands-on producing your own podcast show in the SYN studios.
Are you a student? Tell your teacher about SYN. If you're a teacher, go to syn.org.au/education or email training@syn.org.au.
That's syn.org.au/education or email training@syn.org.au.
Brain juice tip number 4. Never trust your host. All right, here we go. This is question number 6. Going to fill in the blank here. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. Ah, no, it doesn't. That's stupid. You have to go to check-up, so I'm not going to allow that one. Ah, that was a trick question. Brain juice, Saturdays from 3 to 4. Beware the evil quizmaster.
High-Tech Burritos Burrito Eating Contest will have you breathing fire. But hurry, time is running out. Come into High-Tech Burrito Hawthorn before September 6th between 3 and 6 p.m. for your chance to win free burritos for a year. Conquer Godzilla's flame, a burrito so hot you'll have to sign a waiver. Made with chilies voted the hottest of their kind by the Guinness Book of World Records. Check hightechburrito.com.au or on Facebook, High-Tech Burrito Australia. Serving authentic Californian-style Mexican food and home of Melbourne's original gourmet burrito. Sponsoring SYN.
And welcome back to Bound for Glory on SYN. Now, the massive news out of this week in the football world is that Brett Ratten is gone.
Really?
Yeah.
I wasn't up on that.
He'll coach this week against the Saints, and that'll be it. Obviously, the number one choice to coach is Mick Malthouse. The rumours are that it's a 3-year deal worth $3 million, whatever.
Thanks, Caro.
Yes. Now, obviously this is something we really do need to discuss in depth. I'm sure Rowan's discussed it about 6 times this week already and probably sick of it, but bear with us.
No, that's all right.
Now,
One more won't hurt.
do you guys think it was the right decision from the Carlton board to sack Ratten?
No, not at all.
God,
And why? Sorry. Yeah.
In fact,
Why?
no, there are two answers I can give you. I can give you one as a Carlton supporter, and I can give you one as a quote-unquote media professional. Now, look, really, I guess if you look at the whole season, you could probably say there are better options, but you look at it as a supporter and you think, why is he being sacked? I don't understand at all why he's been given the cut. I mean, it seems like it seems exactly like a knee-jerk reaction to the loss against Gold Coast. Had they not lost, I firmly believe that he'd see out his 2-year contract, which in itself is hilarious that they gave him a 2-year contract and are going to pay him out for the 2nd year. To me, it sounds like there's a lot of disharmony behind the Carlton doors if they're going to give a coach 2 years and only really let him allow to see out 1 year of it.
Classic case of everyone ignoring cause and effect. Carlton on field this year with all their injuries, they robbed Peter to pay Paul. They moved players around and they just couldn't afford. They didn't have the depth that other teams had. Just looking at Mark Murphy's face on the footy show when pressed by Sam Newman, you do know you've cost your coach the job, and he was quite steely-eyed, and it just said everything. I think the players ultimately are to blame for this show. I don't think
Scotland said as much yesterday that he knows that they're responsible for it, or he feels like they're responsible for it. And
respect to Ratten as well for not taking the cop out and saying, well, the players played poor. It was a great
press conference.
It was a magnificent press conference.
Footy clubs are funny places because sort of the more things change, the more they stay the same. And one of you touched on it before there. It was just a coach-killing game, and you sort of hope that, they're professional enough to overlook one sort of not blip on the radar, but 1 out of 22 games. But
it's an outlier. It's an aberration.
Well, in the end, I think there's been a series of them, haven't there? I reckon the issues are far deeper than just the coach. The list has shown a real sort of mental fragility. They've continually sort of followed up good performances with poor ones. Now, you, as a board, I guess you'd want to ask yourself, to what extent is the coach responsible for those, I start to use a phrase, but arousal levels?
Sorry.
Yeah, and they clearly decided that we can get someone who's a better motivator. Now, then again, Ratten has shown continuous improvement. His win-loss strike rate's still over 50%. There are extenuating circumstances about this year, which we all know, the injury toll. I think, from all reports, his delegation's got a lot better. His communication with the players has improved. So, as a coach, you can only continue to improve. And he had, in that sense, the runs on the board. So, it makes me think, do the Carlton hierarchy perhaps overrate their capabilities as a playing list? There are issues about, I think, both recruitment and development. One thing that occurs to me is, we're talking about Casbolt, who I know his kicking's dodgy, but he has shown some good signs. Bell's shown some good signs. McInnes did. But would we have seen them if they hadn't had the spate of injuries? One of my criticisms with Rats was his conservatism at the selection table. So that's something else they have to answer. But in the end, I think they have made a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to the result of 1 2-hour game. And I wouldn't say unprofessional, but it's in essence, it is no different to what they did in 1989 when they got beaten by the Brisbane Bears and sacked Robert Walls. And it's no different to what they did in 07 when they got belted by Brisbane and sacked Dennis Pagan. So footy clubs like to think they're more professional, but the mindset sometimes is still very much 1980s.
Can he go elsewhere? Can he go to Port?
I reckon there's a very good chance he'll go to Port because Port, without any disrespect to them, they can't afford to pay the sort of money other clubs could for a huge, huge name. I think there's been, my understanding is they haven't exactly been flooded with potential candidates who, are of the ilk we'd naturally be saying, gee, he'd be a good fit for them.
And no disrespect to Port, but you can see why.
Yeah, why?
Why they won't
why they wouldn't go there?
List of potential
no doubt. But having said that, they're an AFL club. They're not without talent, and if they put the right people in place, and it's a double-edged sword. I think being a Victorian coaching an interstate club, because they might say, yeah, we do need an outside voice, and I think Port have desperately need that. But you've always got those old sort of club parochial pressures coming to bear on you. So could he withstand that? So if I were him, I'd be saying, well, there's got to be some very clear parameters about, you let me do this, you let me do that. But I can't see why he wouldn't be a good coach for Port Adelaide. And just on a personal level, I'd love to see that happen because I know a lot of people are sick of hearing this, but he is a really, really decent guy, Rats. I've enjoyed dealing with him more than most coaches in my career, and I really hope it works out for him.
Do you think that outside, as you mentioned with Port Adelaide, that's what Carlton need? And I don't want to go into deep, heavy club board territory, but is that, as Kernahan described at the press conference during the week, that drive for success, that aggravated sort of mindset to constantly push will end up costing Carlton in the long run?
Well, I think there is, if people looking at Carlton in a critical sense, I think there is a bit of a feeling of an old boys club. And sometimes you can't help that. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. And we sort of, the media often want to have their cake and eat it too, because often we'll turn around and say, well, I remember when we were saying about Richmond, they haven't got enough of the good old Richmond people, and then you get too many in. Hawthorn, 10 years ago, people were saying, oh, it's too much of an old Hawthorn boys club. Now they're saying the fact that guys like Dunstall have been so intimately involved has been a huge advantage for them. So it tends to, the judgment call on that often depends on whether the club's performing well or not. But, look, I think a bigger issue for Carlton is the influence of the people directly outside the club who are, benefactors or coterie members. And we know we're talking about well-heeled businessmen. Bruce Matheson always seems to have a lot to say about the club. And that, and that puts enormous pressures on the people running the club because they're always sort of trying to second guess what these people are thinking, so they can avoid copping flack and the knifing that occurs. So I don't know how they solve that. As long as Carlton is a favoured club of the rich and quote-unquote successful, I think that'll be an issue.
Did the media have and there was obviously the poor loss to Gold Coast, but did the media play a part in the Ratten sacking? I mean, the way that John Ralph and Jay Clark for the Herald Sun, the way that they approached the whole Ratten situation was very embarrassing. I mean, Jay Clark, straight after the telecast, the Collingwood West Coast telecast last Saturday, he was already saying that Carlton are looking elsewhere, that Ratten needs to be sacked, that sort of thing.
Well, there's certainly been an undercurrent right through this season of Carlton keeping an eye open for other options, and it's always tough to tell to what extent there is some substance to that and to what extent it's just being pushed along because it sounds like a good grab for TV or radio, or might make a decent story. And I think in a personal sense this one's been less media driven than some, because it sounds a bit funny, but I think most of the media have a lot of time for Rats, so they've been less inclined to stick the boots into him. That said, we do live in a more sensationalist sort of environment, and one thing that consistently, being one of the old stages of the footy media now, one thing that does annoy me is people constantly going the early crow, in an on-field sense, but also off the field. So a club has 3 losses on end and it's a crisis, or they win 3 in a row and it's a juggernaut, and
I know we all thought that Jay Clark went really early with this, and then
he was the same with the Port Adelaide issue, wasn't he, after the GWS loss?
I think there was also Michelangelo Rucci after the Richmond loss. I thought he jumped on way too early. I don't even think Primus should have been sacked, to be honest.
No, God, no. That's too. I reckon
he didn't have much to work with.
Well, they had a lot more to work with after Primus walked out of the box before the end of the game, which I have to say, even watching that myself, I thought, well, there's a guy who's just sort of hanged himself, really.
But he's not the first coach to walk out of the
box. No, Malcolm Blight did it in the year his team won the premiership.
James Hird did it against Melbourne earlier in the year.
Perhaps Bomber Thompson should be doing it in the Essendon box.
He is the Essendon coach.
Speaking of people hanging themselves, Kernahan's answer to the question, would Ratten have been sacked if Malthouse wasn't available? And the 5-second pause
that was the most awkward media moment of the year.
We were talking about that last night. There's pregnant pauses and there's pregnant pauses, and that one was a pregnancy which ended up delivering quintuplets because it was a spectacular pause, and it said plenty. In fact, I think we were having a pause off at one stage, so you could do the most meaningful pause. It doesn't make for great radio.
Like you said, it said everything it needed to say about the issue. I mean, obviously, the answer is no.
God.
I mean, and speaking of Malthouse, is he going to come to Carlton now?
Rowan?
Well, you listen to Mick. I heard him on AW the other day, and it was all, well, no, absolutely, up in the air, and... my wife was in tears.
He's a gymnast. He's doing a lot of flips.
He is. Look, I think the bottom line out of this is when it comes to these sort of decisions and appointments, people will basically lie, and we have to accept that. And I understand reasons for it, but Carlton would be the most unprofessional sporting organisation in the entire world if they had have done what they've done with their current coach without having stitched up his
I was going to say, surely they couldn't have cut a coach that's on it, that had another year on his contract, without knowing that they have a better, somebody better to come in and fit in that position.
No, I don't think anyone in the football world seriously believes they haven't got a tacit agreement with Mick Malthouse. The Roos one's interesting because there are significant people on the Carlton board and around the club again, those mysterious forces, who would far prefer Roos as coach. Now, Roosie has said consistently, I want to, my son's doing VCE, so I want to stay where I am. Now, last time I checked, there were actually schools in Melbourne where he could do his VCE, but you would think from what we're hearing that the Malthouse thing is locked away and it's a 3-year deal for about $1 million a year.
Something that keeps popping up in my head is the fact that he does have a contract with La Trobe University. I know this is a minor thing that can easily be gotten out of, but he probably does have a contract with La Trobe because he's the Vice Chancellor's fellow there. He holds some sort of academic position. it's probably not a 3-year deal worth $3 million, but it is a contract. So, I mean, that's something that sticks in my mind that he might have to get out of. But
yeah, well, there's the 3AW contract and the Channel 7 contract, and Channel 7 will be worried now. They've lost Brett Kirk and Mick Malthouse, so there's...
I'm not so concerned about the Brett Kirk thing.
This is an extremely minor thing, but has anybody noticed the way Brett Kirk holds a microphone?
No.
It's extremely... I'm not going to explain it. Just next time you see Brett Kirk on TV, just watch the way he holds a microphone.
Yes,
because it's questionable.
The Channel 7...
Microphone gate.
Channel 7 coverage of football has been a bit of a recurring theme for me this year, I have to say, in various forums. And be interesting to see who they replace Kirky with. Clearly, they're looking for some sort of quasi-Buddhist female-friendly presence, and it doesn't leave them a lot of options in the football world.
Could replace Malthouse with another Malthouse. Get Christie in there.
Yeah, well, she's done her time. She was actually a pretty reasonable boundary rider, to be honest. So, yeah, look, I've given up sort of trying to second-guess the decisions that TV executives make. I know I'm not on their radar for the next 100 years, that's for sure.
And this is for the last time, we'll speak about it for a minute because I know you're sick of it. Cloak, Carlton, come on, let's just get this out of the way.
Well... I don't know, this is becoming a minority view, but I still think he might end up staying because I think, he's driven his market value down. I mean, there's still no doubt he'd be a pretty handy pickup. But I just wonder if people make too much about the coach-player connection. I mean, sure, he had a good relationship with Mick Malthouse, but who's to say his relationship with Nathan Buckley's terrible? And, players do have to perform for different coaches, and is that enough to tip the balance in Carlton's favour? I think, what Collingwood are offering him seems pretty fair and reasonable.
Not to his dad.
No, well, his dad has some issues.
Well, we heard that the deal was. We heard that the deal was done and dusted before David Cloak was unhappy with it, and then David Cloak was kicked out of the negotiations, and everything was back up in the air, and here we are.
Well, there's a bit of a theory about this that it's a bit of payback by the Cloak family for the last time he signed a contract, where they allegedly sort of pushed it under his nose on the day of the Copeland Trophy and said, here it is, Travis, sign, and he duly signed up, and then he won the Copeland, and that sort of, they'd foregone their opportunity to up the ante a bit, at which point, reportedly, his father/manager said, we'll get him next time. So, but it's a pretty dangerous game to play, I think, and the way it's gone, I think he needs Collingwood more than they need him. So, look, anything could happen yet, but I still think he might end up staying.
If it is payback, that is one of the most unprofessional things I've ever heard.
Well, like I said before, footy likes to think it's professional, and most of the time it is, but there's still some tribalism that comes out in people's behaviour quite often.
Yeah, I think everyone's got an opinion on the Cloak issue. We'd love to hear yours on 0427 767 767. We'll be back with Rohan Connolly right after these SYN messages.
Can't get enough of epic sax guy? Listen to Europop and more on Around the World in 80 Songs, Tuesday mornings from 9 to 10, only on SYN.
Here, we see two Victorian breeds at risk of imminent extinction. Headphonus addictus and Sulphonus distractus. Ah, the distinctive call of their biggest threat, Thamus heavy as rhinoceros. Placid, 30-ton creature, rarely capable of stopping in time if one of them is to cross its path.
Remember, pause the tunes, not your senses. Look, listen, be alert around trams.
SYN sponsor.
Who wants to play video games?
Radio Respawn.
Saturdays 1 to 2 p.m.
Getting insight from developers.
Academy Award-winning Ben Britton, Hinman Games.
I'm Sam from Raptors Games.
The media.
Gaetano Preciat, editor at mmgm.com.
Ricky Plunk from the Pubbenham Geek.
Also giving gamers the opportunity
to discuss the latest and greatest in the gaming world. Join Josh.
Saturdays 1 to 2 p.m.
for Radio Respawn.
SYN's community for gamers.
By gamers.
And you're listening to Bound for Glory on SYN. Now, Matt's going to take us through the All-Australian team.
Certainly are, and if you have any issues with the team that I've come together, feel free to chime in and let me know. We'll start with the back line. Back pocket, I've got Beau Waters, full-back, Luke McFarlane, the other pocket, Michael Johnson. So I guess I've sort of had a look at more position, like having a look at the position that they play for the back line. Bo Waters has got to be one of the best shutdown, medium-sized defenders in the competition. I think he to slot into that spot as a shoe-in. Luke McFarland's also had another magnificent season. He seems to be one of those names every year that just pops up and can do that spot. Michael Johnson from Fremantle was the one that I sort of, I guess you could question in a way. But if you look at his game, he can just about do anything. He can play tall, he can play small, he runs, he rebounds, he tackles. He's a magnificent player.
The big one missing for me there is probably Darren Glass. I know he probably hasn't had a great last couple of weeks, but on form, I think he probably deserves to be in the team.
He's not in the starting team. I haven't got him on the interchange page.
Oh, you do? Sorry.
Yeah, well done. I've got him on the interchange page. Halfback, Sean Dempster from St Kilda. A lot of people disagree, and a lot of people will agree with this. I think he has definitely gone under the radar. Excellent season from Dempster, and if he's not in, I will question the selectors very much.
I think you've made a really good selection there with Dempster. I think he's added a sort of attacking, rebounding side to his game. He's very well known for his lockdown and shutdown. He does magnificent jobs on some of the best sort of quicker midfielders in the league, and I think he's added another string to his. Was it string to his bow?
That's the one.
That's the one. I nearly stuffed it up.
If you talk to St Kilda, they just massively rate the year he's had. So I think that's a really good call. Johnson's an interesting one. I did I have to say I haven't sat down and started even thinking about what team I'd pick for the end of the year. I had Johnson in my mid-season team. And I remember watching him for a few weeks afterwards, and he had a real poor patch there. I think along with the side, he was very fumbly and just looked a bit unsure. The one I've watched along with the years gone who I thought maybe he could squeeze in there, and he must have been close to be Josh Gibson, because he's fantastic spoiler, great rebounder. He's able to negate taller opponents, and he sort of gives you a bit of everything, and he's been fantastic for the Hawthorn backline. So I'd certainly think about having him in there. But as a back six, I reckon that's really, really solid.
Yeah, the rest of the back six that you mentioned, at centre-half back is Ted Richards from Sydney. I think that sort of explains itself.
Just does not get enough coverage down here.
No, he's fantastic. And the other flanker is Brett Delidio, more so because he won't fit into the midfield, but I think that he deserves to have a starting role. His work when he does play on the half-back line is fantastic, and he's also relatively underrated for his rebound work that he does do.
I agree with you that he won't fit into midfield, because this is a real strong midfield you've got.
This is a fantastic midfield, and this is one of the best midfields I think we've seen for a very long time. At the centre line, I have got Trent Cotchin on the wing. That he deserves all the praise you can possibly give.
Gun.
He's a champion. Josh Kennedy from Sydney. His clearance work and his hard grunt work is just superb, and he's when you're shaping a team, you want somebody like him starting from the centre.
He kicks goals too.
Yes, that's it.
That's been Sydney's.
Most of Sydney's midfield does.
Yeah.
That's been attack for the season. They haven't gone to a Reed or a Goods because he hasn't been there, but it's the reason why they're up there. You just don't know where the goals are going to come from.
Dame Beams fills out that centre line. Well, I might as well do the on-ballers while I'm talking about the midfield. I've got Dean Cox start as the starting ruck. I have on the bench Sam Jacobs, and I chose to have Cox starting because when you have a look at the hit-out, Sam Jacobs has about 100 more than Dean Cox, but Dean Cox has about 20 more goals, a ton of more tackles, more marks. He
single-handedly won West Coast the game against North Melbourne down in Hobart. Yeah, he's the only choice for your first ruck.
These two next for Ruck, Rover, and Rover, pretty much they sort of speak for themselves. Joe Watson and Gary Ablett, both having just fantastic seasons. It's unfortunate because Joe Watson will probably miss out on a Brownlow due to his team's second half performance, but he deserves a lot of credit for the hard work he does. Even in the losses, he picks up 29 good, effective disposals. He's just a champion. So,
I think especially Dane Beams. He's worth, I reckon, a good punt at this year's Brownlow, as in like a sort of player that is a good chance at getting there. But the votes are going to go elsewhere, and that's the thing with all Australian teams and the Brownlow medal. You try and pack in as much midfielders as possible, and sort of outside players who sort of have a maximum, like a sort of Suckling ends up missing out, and he's got arguably the best kick in the league. It's a strange.
No, it's a good point, because one position that's almost sort of become redundant is the wing, isn't it? I mean, how many specialist wingmen can you think of now? They're really
Rory Sloane.
Yeah, well, I
Lewis
mean,
Jetta.
I'm not sure I can think of any, really. Lewis Jetta would be probably as close as any. I think my mid-season team, I had Steele side bottom on a wing. And at that stage, Beams and him were about neck and neck. But there's no doubt Beams' second half of the year has been a lot better than side bottoms. And the thing I love about him is he's such a... he's got, he can go hard when he has to, but he's a silky user of the ball. Lovely kick. And, if it weren't for the sleeve of tats, he'd just be the full thing. But, no, he certainly deserves a spot in there, no question at all.
I think when you look at Dane Beams and Dane Swan, I see Dane Beams as a more silky, effective Dane Swan.
He's got more aesthetic
Swan's grunt
qualities, yeah, and it's the way Swan runs, there's nothing sort of particularly graceful about it, is it? Whereas, he waddles. Whereas Beams, he's a real smooth mover. So, quality act, and, I'd have him in.
I can remember, just to jump in front of you there, mate, I can remember when, maybe at the start of the season, end of last season, Collingwood fans were talking about trading, some of their midfielders to keep, their better ones. And Dane Beams was way down the list behind Pendlebury, Swan, Thomas, who are the other ones, even behind Sidebottom, even behind Blair for some people. And, I mean, now you probably have him only behind Pendlebury and Swan.
Well, there was a bit of a... he didn't play well in either of the grand finals in 210, did he? And then he ended up...
2 touches in one of them, I think.
Yeah, and, for some people that weighs very heavily. But there's no doubt he's sort of answered all those questions. Well, he hasn't answered that one until he plays a good grand final. But he's certainly got no problems firing on the big occasion. He has plenty of times.
Now, the last thing on Collingwood before we move on, just wait until they get Luke Ball back next year. It's going to be, their midfield is going to be scary.
Everyone's forgotten about him a little bit, I think.
You'll have Pendlebury, Swan, Beams, no.
Well, Wellingham's another one.
And Wellingham as well.
I'm a real rat for Wellingham. I think he gets underrated quite a bit, but that's what happens when you have that deeper midfield.
The forward six, the half-forward flankers are more, they're sort of unlucky to miss out on a midfield spot. Patrick Dangerfield, he's very forward, very damaging when he manages to go forward. Centre-half forward, I have Tom Hawkins. That speaks for itself. He deserves to have a spot this year. As we say a lot on this show, 18 months is a very, very interesting transition for Tom Hawkins. I mean, he couldn't kick a goal to save himself 18 months ago, and now if you put him 40 metres out on a slight angle,
confidence.
You think
that's through the roof.
And that goal against Hawthorn to win the game, I think, really is the big turning point, because he doesn't look like he can miss at the moment. The other half-forward flanker I have is Matthew Boyd, who I think slides under the radar a lot in a poor team.
Controversy, though.
How so?
I don't think Boyd should be in there.
I'll second that. I think he works hard. He's similar work rate to a sort of Swan. He always tries to get to the next contest, and I think maybe because he's tired, maybe that's why some of his disposals aren't as damaging as another player. Sorry. I just think that there's other players on half-forward flank. Lewis Jett is stiff, very stiff. Maybe his last... That's a good question.
I have to agree with that up there, though.
Kieran Jack.
Kieran Jack. Yeah. I think he's. I wouldn't say much more deserving than Matthew Boyd, but I think he's probably.
There's when you try and put the midfield together, there are a lot of people that will miss out that probably deserve a spot, and that's sort of just how it works, I guess.
That's always the one that causes the most consternation. The midfielders who get left out. The thing I'd say about Boyd is, it's a lot harder to get attention in a side that people have taken their eye off. And I've got to admit, I mean, I haven't seen much of the Bulldogs lately, because you end up sort of concentrating on the top sides. But his disposal is the knock on his game. He does a lot of up and under sort of stuff and can turn it over. But in terms of sheer numbers, but you look at Boyd's touches and they're never quite as damaging as, say, Ryan Griffin if he gets equivalent touches or even close to. So, yeah, look, he's a great workhorse, and he certainly, I wouldn't begrudge him a spot, but, there will always end up being at least 10 midfield types who you could argue a spot for who miss out.
Definitely, and the forward line, we've got Stephen Milne in the pocket. He's a shoe-in for that.
As much as you
spot.
hate him, he's a good player.
He's a fantastic player, even if it doesn't matter what type of person he is. I don't know him personally, so I'll move on from there, because this is getting awkward. Matthew Pavlich at full forward. He's just been fantastic. As far as genuine key forwards go in the competition, I'd have him above everybody because he's just, I think Ross Lyons sort of figured out that he has this big 198 centimetre tall big guy that can mark and kick goals, and he's playing him from the goal square final.
I don't think he's a genuine key forward though. He's a midfielder. He can play anywhere on the ground, but I think his best position is probably in that key forward slot. He's not like Tom Hawkins or Travis Cloak where you stick them in the goal scorer and say, go get the footy. He can play in the midfield. He can play on the half-back line, stuff like that.
He's actually won All-Australian selection at full-back, funnily enough, in a year where he didn't really play full-back. So, I mean, they can be questionable with the position sometimes. But it's interesting with Pavlich, because I reckon when I did my half-season team, we were actually saying at that stage he'd been relatively disappointing. So his second half of the year has just been phenomenal. And look, it all comes down to what armoury you've got elsewhere, haven't you? And Fremantle now have got enough depth that they can... I think, personally, Freo would always have used him there if they could have, but they just didn't have enough depth in their best side to be able to have that luxury, and now perhaps they do. And have a look at the impact it's had on their goal scoring, because they're... I did the stats the other day. In the last 7 weeks, their average points for Freo has gone from 75 up to 109 or something. And their 4 highest scores of the season have come in the last 7 games. So it's made a huge difference to their whole game style.
I think even Walker up forward, I mean, you don't have him down, but I think he's even one, not necessarily straight in the team, but he's definitely one up for consideration. He's definitely been one of Adelaide's most improved over the year. You know, obviously, you've got your Sloanes and your Dangerfields, but he looks as if he can get going under the bright lights of Amy Stadium in a final, he'll be very hard to stop, because he's similar to Hawkins in confidence, but he's got that raw attack on the ball and that raw defensive side. He's been caught sling tackling a couple of times. That's how aggressive he gets into it.
He's a great player. I enjoy watching him too. It's the interesting thing with him is how quickly he's become such a loathed and despised figure among opposition supporters. And I guess the mullet sort of partly, he does have that sort of, I'm a bit of a knob.
He's just a bit of a bogan, I think. He's from Broken Hill. He's a country boy who I don't think has learnt to play nicely with the other children. And he just seems like a bit of a knob. He's a good footballer, and I think if Tippett ends up going to the Gold Coast, you'll see the best come out in Taylor Walker.
And we'll round out the starting team. The other forward pocket we've got is Lewis Jetta. He probably deserves to be on a wing or something like that. That's more of his most effective position on a half-forward flank, but yeah, there's just not enough space up there. Even as a forward pocket, he's fantastic. Now, as the interchange, as we mentioned beforehand, Sam Jacobs as the backup ruckman has just been fantastic.
There's about 25 players who can go into the interchange every year,
definitely.
So it's tough to pick.
Next one is Darren Glass, as we mentioned beforehand. Andrew Swallow I have in because of his grunt and the tackling that he's just as far as grunt players go, he sets the benchmark every single week for North Melbourne, and part of the reason why they've really lifted up from being that those easy beats in the early part of the season. The last one to wrap up the team is Scott Thompson. Again, pretty self-explanatory. Had a great season, but I don't think he's been as good as the other ones that have been selected.
Just quickly on Swallow, I think that if you're going to tag someone, I know it's hard to tag inside midfielders with all the traffic and bodies flying around, but you really take him out of the game, North Melbourne struggle. And it's that younger group of Bastanak, Zeeble that have to now lift, so that attention sort of, opposition don't figure out that, because if you beat North in the contested ball, you've got them on the ropes.
Now, there were 3 names that I wrote down that I thought were relatively unlucky to get a spot. One of them was Josh Gibson, as you mentioned before, Rowan. The other one would be Lance Franklin, because he's been fantastic when he plays, but when you miss 6 games in a row, it's hard to get selection over players that have played the majority of the season. And the last one is Alex Rance for Richmond. I think he's just been fantastic, and if there are an award for a best young one key defender, he would win it by a landslide in front of then Talia for Adelaide, but then there's nobody else.
I had Rance in my mid-season team and copped a bit of flack about it at the time, actually, but I thought, he was great on the intercept, good rebound, was able to negate okay. He's had a couple of guys have got hold of him at times, haven't they? But that's going to happen to you when you...
Over the course of a long season, it's going to happen to every defender.
Yeah.
I mean, he got in the game against Richmond. He got Petrie for 3 quarters, and then he got off the leash. But the 3 quarters that he got Petrie, he really he stopped him in his tracks. He followed him everywhere. He was third man up at times, and the other key forwards went for the ball. And he was just... I think he's going to be... Richmond are really well placed with their backline that they've acquired over the last 2 years.
Oh, look, there's no... Just quickly on the Tigers, and Richmond fans of my age are beside themselves. It's been 30-odd years, but there's no doubt this time they do have the foundations there. I mean, a class midfield, as we see, an improving defence. Probably still need a bit of support for Rewalt in the goal-kicking sense, but they're almost there. And then you look at, 5 games lost by 12 points or less. I mean, they're this close to having had 14, 15 wins. I'm pretty sure I'll be putting them in my 8 next year.
Yeah, agree. I think we all will. Just on that note, we'll be back right after these SYN messages.
Sergei Stepanov is a Moldovan musician and member of the Sunstroke project, which shot to fame in 2010 after appearing at the 55th annual Eurovision Song Contest. He's known for his eccentric dancing style and absolute ownage of the alto saxophone. But who's he better known as? Here's a hint. For more pop culture trivia, tune into Brain Juice, Saturdays from 3 to 4 to hear 2 contestants battling it out in an epic encounter of pop culture wisdom, only on SYN Radio. Stay with us. We have more fun here for you.
On SYN. You're listening to SYN Radio.
And we're back listening to Bound for Glory on SYN. Now we're just going to run through a quick preview of the games in this final round of football. The finals just around the corner. The teams in the top 8 jostling for position. Nearly choked there. Massive game down in Geelong.
The biggest one of the round, easily.
Yeah, easy. Game of the round up. Last night didn't turn out the way we all thought it would. But, Geelong, this is their chance to get a home final because I really rate them. But what I saw against West Coast, they're susceptible now when they travel.
Yeah, look, it's huge. This. I've written about this one today. Sydney will have plenty of confidence having beaten them the last 2 times. They beat the only side to beat Geelong down there in 36 games. Did beat them at the SCG too earlier this year, and they've beaten them in different ways. They beat them down Geelong last year in a real grind. This year up at the SCG, 7-goal first quarter. They beat them with outside runs. So that flexibility of the way they play footy, the Swans, is a real edge. Having said that, they are, and they deserve plenty of credit. Having said all that, I really still do rate the Cats, and the home thing is what tips it for me, so I'm going for Geelong.
I think it'll be interesting to see the way that Sydney bounced back from blowing a 40-point lead last week at their home ground. They're going to be coming up against a team that want to win. They've shown that they love winning finals, and they love this time of year. They switch on in the last 10 weeks of the season, and I think Geelong are going to get it done.
Yeah, I'll take the Cats too.
Yeah, I'll take the Cats. Home crowd will get behind them. Next game, go to Amy Stadium. The Crows, they take on the Suns. Second position up for grabs here for Adelaide. They can't.
They'll do it pretty easy.
They should.
I think so.
You'd hope so.
I said this last week.
They said Carlton would do it easy.
Yeah. But it's at Adelaide. You've got to think it's at Amy Stadium. It's a different scenario. You don't think that Gold Coast are going to get on top of
They're coming to the end of another long season and a lot of tired young bodies. So
I think there'll be a bit of a wet down from last week for Gold Coast, so that'll that'll increase the winning margin from about 12 goals to maybe 15.
Yeah, Ablett will finish off his season with 50 touches just to round it up.
Dangerfield named on Harley Bennell. That's just a salivating matchup.
Yeah,
Love that.
There's a couple there.
Yeah.
I just think Adelaide, they'll with ease. Next game, North Melbourne, GWS.
Skip.
There's something in it there because the margin with the Freo Melbourne game will decide who plays where in the first week of finals. But I can't see North winning by less than 15 goals. So
They have to. I mean, they've got to come out and beat an absolute cricket score to make sure they stay ahead of Freo. So you'd have to think 100 points plus.
Yeah, I think North Melbourne came out sort of half-assed against Melbourne and the Western Bulldogs. Maybe they were saving themselves up for the tougher games that were after
I think we might have been saving ourselves for Freo, and that didn't turn out too well.
So, no, you just got to go now.
When a team turns it on against one of Gold Coast and GWS, if they turn it on for 4 quarters, they're going to win by a big margin.
It's going to get legitimately ugly. So.
Yeah, I think that's what we're going to see.
Well, 128 first time round, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So.
They kick a goal to the third quarter. Next game tonight, the old foes meet. Collingwood, Essendon, both not in the best of form. Rowan, was it right for Collingwood to drop Dawes?
Oh, I think it was coming. I mean, he's had every chance, hasn't he? You know, funnily enough, I thought early last week they pushed Cloak and Dawes up the ground a bit, and guys like Fasolo really benefited from that. But you've got to offer something, and he's, you know, Cloak at least is still number one for contested marks. Dawes, I thought he turned it around against Sydney about 3 weeks ago, but he's slipped back, and he seems to rely so heavily on confidence.
You can't drop him for this game. Surely they should have dropped him for last week after the North Melbourne game and had him back for this game, because if he's going to kick goals, it'll be against Essendon.
No, it's a good point, and it sort of shows they're just wavering a bit on what they stuck fast with. But look, Essendon are just shot to ribbons mentally and physically. Collingwood need to win. How much they win by, I guess, isn't that material, but it's going to be pretty ugly. Even with my Bombers supporting hat on, I'm glad I'm not going to be there.
Yeah, I think the Bombers, but I don't think it'll be a blowout. Essendon get up for Collingwood, and I think it'll just be a casual 4 or 5 goal win.
I've got to tip the Pies.
I think this is going to be one of those games, might even be the turning point in Collingwood's season, where they win by 60 points and they go into finals with a lot of head of steam, really.
Big stage, the bright lights, this is where they need to turn it on. If they
Moving on, so we're running out of time very quickly. Freo Melbourne over there at Patterson's. Again, this is just a percentage issue. Freo, obviously Melbourne are no good.
Now, see, I question, I'm not 100% sold on the result of this game, to be honest. And hear me out, because whenever Melbourne seem to lose somebody who's significant to the team, they seem to lift for some reason, and they were really good for the first quarter against Adelaide. They got blown away by however many points, but they were really good last week, and I think with the whole percentage issue in Fremantle's heads, I think this could be a bit closer than what people think.
I don't. No, I understand the theory, but I just think they really put it into top drive last week, Freo. They were so impressive just with the scoring power, and they have to either win by a heap or they have to win by not too much. I think they'll take the winning by a heap option, and I reckon they'll kill them.
Yeah, I think Ross Lyon's too much of a competitive beast to just say, "Oh no, we'll just go easy."
Man. He's an angry man.
You're not a fan of him, Wits.
I don't like him very much, but he's a good football coach. I don't like the way he coaches, but it gets results. So
Lee Matthews said during the week that they should try and win by as little as possible. That's probably why he shouldn't be a senior coach ever again. Moving on, next game.
The Ratten Cup, St Kilda versus Carlton, or Carlton versus St Kilda.
You'd hope that Carlton would get up for Ratten.
I think that's the only thing that's going to make this game very interesting at all. I think Carlton will get up just because of Ratten.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Will they get up, or will they just throw in the towel altogether? And
I think that would be disrespectful to Ratten, though.
I think there's a
losing against Gold Coast was disrespectful for Ratten.
There's certainly a motivational factor, but St Kilda's playing the better footy. I think they'll win it.
Yeah, I think St Kilda have also last week they sort of put the cue in the rack at half time, and I think they're just winding down. Next game over at the MCG.
Final game, isn't it?
No.
Richmond versus Port.
Quickly, Rewalt, can he do the Coleman?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
Maybe.
You bet on him.
Yeah, I don't care about the Coleman too much. It's too low a tally to even award it this year, I reckon. It's amazing. We had a guy kicking 100 goals plus 4 years ago. Now it's going to be one with, 60-something?
Yeah.
It's just one of those games that doesn't do much for you.
No, Richmond by enough. They've had some good wins.
Richmond will finish the season with an 80-point win or something. They haven't got anything to lose. Might as well.
And the last game of the year is,
last game of the year.
Last game of the home and away season. Apologies. Brisbane and the Dogs.
Don't care.
Yeah,
Brisbane by margin.
Yeah, I think Brisbane are playing some reasonable footy at the moment. Dogs played a lot better last week, but at the Gabba, you've got to go with Brisbane there.
Yep, I think Brisbane will push finals next year.
I like their list.
So do I. especially Golby and Pollock. They look two good footballers.
Polkinghorn.
There's a few there. Before we go down that path and just go completely over time, I think we have to thank Rohan for coming in today.
Thank you very much. Pleasure, guys. Great to be here. Like the show, and I'll plug it wherever possible.
Fantastic.
Thanks for that, Rohan. Just a few plugs.
Bound for Glory News, most fantastic news service ever.
Obviously.
In history.
There's a
Facebook. We have a Facebook and a Twitter, Bound for Glory and Bound for Glory FM.
I'm not sure what this will do for you now that the Supercoach year is over, but follow Sarge Supercoach. She's got some big plans for 2013, so I think you should just keep an eye on that. Follow him on Twitter.
That's a wrap.
I think that's we're done. You've been listening to Bound for Glory. Rohan, thank you.
We'll be there for finals next week.
I'm invincible. I'm paying money. The girl's happy. She's got no money. I got my rocks off. Oh, how good is this?